Hello, and welcome to my presentation. My name is Tabitha Brotherton, and today I'm sharing an in-depth analysis of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility within our library environments. To provide some context for this recording, this presentation serves as my first informal observation milestone. I'm currently in the first of 3 scheduled semesters of Practicum experience. I'm tackling this initial stretch during the summer term and will be continuing my fieldwork through the upcoming fall and spring semesters leading up to my graduation. Because it is a summer term and my site mentor was unavailable for a live recorded conversation, I'm completing this requirement as a structured 15-minute screencast presentation. To ensure this discussion is deeply rooted in contemporary library and information science from day one, I utilized the University of North Texas Willis Library databases to source critical peer-reviewed research studies from recent years, specifically looking at work published between 2022 and 2026. So again, this will be fulfilling the first informal observation requirement for the first of 3 practicum semesters. The summer screencast presentation synthesizes initial field observations with 3 peer-reviewed studies. I actually added a few more from the UNT Willis Library databases to investigate proactive cultural competence and sensory inclusive accessibility. We'll be talking about lived experience synthesis, cultural competence focus, and accessibility modifications. Today, we're going to dive deep into those 2 foundational questions that we were given regarding my practicum. First, how do we actively display and support individual and group perspectives through cultural competence? And second, what concrete actionable changes can we implement to make both the physical and digital library space truly accessible to patrons with special and neurodivergent needs? Let's begin by looking at the theoretical framework guiding my 3-semester journey. Theoretical foundations. LIS frameworks are used to analyze practicum observations. Yazdani emphasizes that equity requires cultural awareness and genuine inclusion. These concepts guide culturally competent, accessible library service delivery. To evaluate a library environment effectively, we cannot just look at surface-level interactions. We have to ground our observations in established LIS frameworks. During my research via the UNT databases, I closely examined a 2024 study by Enyan Yazdani, published in the Journal of the Australian Library and Information Association. Yazdani introduces a powerful concept known as the pedagogy of care within academic and community libraries. Essentially, this framework argues that fostering a true sense of belonging requires a lot more than just having a diverse book collection, and I agree. It demands that library workers possess a broad intellectual and cultural competence so they can actively dismantle systemic barriers for ethnic minorities and underrepresented groups. Living in a small and working in a small town in Texas, I feel like this is especially true working within our school library systems and even in our public library systems. Cultural competence isn't a static achievement. It's not stagnant. It's something that's going to be ongoing, developmental process. It means aligning our personal behaviors, our own biases, our institutional attitudes, and our concrete policies to match the real-world needs of cross-cultural communities. But accessibility isn't just about culture or race. It's about ability. In a 2026 article by William Myhill published in the Library with the Lead Pipe, the author addresses a major blind spot in libraries: disconscious ableism. This is an impaired or distorted way of thinking about disability where we tacitly accept dominant ableist norms without questioning them. It shows up in the way we design spaces, how we write online guides, and how staff interact with patrons who don't fit a neurotypical or able-bodied mold. By combining Yazdani's pedagogy of care with Myhill's critique of disconscious ableism, we get a clear lens to critique our current library practices. Let's look at how this applies directly to frontline services. Now, looking at our first prompt, how could I display inclusiveness, cultural competence, or support individual and group perspectives during my practicum hours? Because my role at the desk is just beginning this summer and I will continue over the next year, I want to focus on concrete, proactive interventions that I will and can implement. As I progress through my hours to elevate the library's DEIA footprint. First, I will propose developing explicit onboarding tools for student employees. Research by Emily Fair in Reference Services Review notes that academic libraries rely heavily on student workers for initial patron triage, yet these individuals rarely receive explicit training. To resolve this, I intend to design a scenario-based onboarding module that teaches frontline staff how to navigate cultural differences, language barriers, and diverse neurodivergent communication styles from day one. Second, I can establish a peer-to-peer feedback loop. Often, junior library staff face complex cross-cultural reference transactions alone. I want to build informal reflection loops where we can safely share encounters, discuss what worked, and help each other build empathy and patience. And I want to say that there's a lot of ways that this can be worked depending on grade levels or even within the regular volunteers in a public library. But there's so many ways that you can make this accessible, from elementary libraries, middle school libraries, all the way up to high school libraries. Third, I will implement cultural humility checklists. It is incredibly easy to default to robotic, fast-paced reference service during busy peak hours. And a lot of times that kind of gears more towards smaller public libraries in our area, but also within schools, it's just really easy to fall back into, again, that default style. I plan to construct quick desk reminders that prompt staff to take a deep breath, verify patron understanding, and actively check their own implicit biases in real time during a reference interview. This right here is something that I think that's going to go a long way, because a lot of us are afraid to kind of tackle our own biases or even admit that we have them. And I think with cultural competence, that's something that we really need to address and tackle, and we can find ways to do that. Finally, I can organize user need audits. Truly understanding our community means asking them directly. Over the next 2 semesters, I hope to build simple feedback mechanisms targeted at underrepresented student groups to identify where they face systemic hurdles. If we know what their problems are or what hurdles they face, then we can be proactive about removing some of those barriers. By adopting Nassim Yazdani's pedagogy of care, these planned actions ensure that we actively adapt the library to the community, rather than forcing patrons to adapt to a rigid institutional hierarchy. Now let's pivot to our second prompt. What changes could we make to the library to make it more accessible to people with special needs? Well, traditionally, when libraries think about accessibility, they look straight at the ADA, or Americans with Disability Act, compliance and regulations. We check for wheelchair ramps, elevator access, and automatic doors. But a 2026 study by KQ Manwiller out of Westchester University notes that while these legal mandates are absolutely vital, this narrow focus frequently overlooks patrons with invisible or neurodivergent needs, such as those individuals on the autism spectrum or those with sensory processing differences. When I evaluated my practicum's many different sites in the physical environment during the initial summertime, I noticed several sensory barriers. A 2022 study by Lauren Hunlick and colleagues in Curator, the Museum Journal, explores how environmental inputs like harsh, buzzing fluorescent lighting, echoing spaces, and loud hand dryers in public restrooms can cause extreme overstimulation. For many neurodivergent individuals or families with autistic children, this sensory overload causes so much anxiety that they choose to completely avoid the library altogether. To counter this, I propose implementing low-cost, high-impact sensory changes based on Hunlick's Dimensions of Accessibility framework. First, we can establish designated quiet zones. We currently have quiet study areas, but they still feature bright lighting and visual distractions. I recommend converting underutilized room. It could even be a closet, just some kind of space that could be dedicated to a low sensory decompression space. This room would feature dimmable lighting, comfortable non-traditional seating, and a checkout basket of noise-canceling headphones. Second, we can introduce sensory-friendly hours. And I know this is kind of hard in the classroom. Again, this kind of leans more towards public library, but I'm sure there are also like after school hours, or maybe like during study guides, something like that, that you could also have sensory friendly time where you would have specific minimized administrative noises, loud conversations. And this, I think it's a good way just to accommodate sensory sensitive patrons. Finally, As mentioned earlier, we need staff training on neurodiversity so that library workers understand that a patron stimming, pacing, or avoiding eye contact is not a behavioral problem to be policed or be afraid of, but it's a valid way of navigating a space. Of course, we've got to address that modern accessibility doesn't stop at the physical front doors of the building. In 2026, so much of our library usage happens online, meaning the digital infrastructure. It has to be just as inclusive. We're not talking about wheelchair ramps or automatic doors. We're also talking about that technology space. During my practicum, I've spent time reviewing our online research guides, commonly known as LibGuides. An excellent 2023 study by E. Aronson of the Journal of the Medical Library Association notes that while platforms like SpringShare build great accessibility compliance into their software, the actual accessibility of the guide itself relies entirely on the individual librarian creating the content. When looking at our current guides, I noticed several issues. Images lacking alternative text, non-descriptive hyperlinks that just say click here, and poor heading structures that completely scramble screen readers used by visually impaired patrons. As an actual change I want to spearhead as I continue my work here is comprehensive digital accessibility audit of our subject guides. By ensuring all content creators use proper alt text, clean heading hierarchies, and high contrast layouts, we ensure screen reader compatibility for all users. And that's something that I also need to work on myself. That was something I worked on last semester in a class, and I'm still kind of new to the extra technology and digital accessibility part, but there are so many different things that you can do and I'm learning about, so I'm really excited to be better at having compatibility for all of our users. Furthermore, we can look at innovative resource solutions right here from UNT. In a 2022 project paper by S. Keshmirpur, posted in the UNT Digital Library, the author details Gadget Lending Project, designed to fill equity gaps. We could easily expand our current technology lending to include assistive devices, such as a specialized trackball mice, screen magnifier overlays, and portable sensory regulation items. Providing these tools directly to students bridges both economic and physical accessibility gaps simultaneously. That would be something really good for school libraries in all stages: elementary, junior high, and high school. Inclusion requires moving beyond legal compliance to an active pedagogy of care. Key commitments incorporate cultural humility into reference interactions, train frontline staff to mitigate implicit bias, restructure physical spaces to accommodate sensory needs, audit digital guides for universal accessibility. Together, these steps transform the library into an authentic center of community belonging, shaping a professional philosophy grounded in equity and access. So to wrap things up, examining my practicum site throughout the research of Yazdani, Myhill Ferrer, and our other authors proves that true library inclusion is a continuous shift, and you're constantly kind of thinking about this. It's a mindset move. We have to move away from passive legal compliance and move towards active, empathetic pedagogy of care. By integrating cultural humility into our daily reference interviews, training our frontline staff and student helpers, anybody that interacts with our patrons, to actively recognize and mitigate implicit biases, restructuring of our physical layouts to soothe sensory sensitivities, and auditing our digital spaces for universal design, we do something incredible. We transform the library from a simple warehouse for books into an authentic, living center of community, safety, and belonging. These first few weeks of hands-on experience backed by the brilliant literature available through the UNT Willis Library have been helping me shape my goals for the upcoming fall and spring terms. As I continue through my 3 semesters of practicum and prepare to enter the information field as a professional librarian, these tenets of universal accessibility and proactive inclusion will remain at the absolute core of my practice. Thank you so much for your time and for listening to my presentation. Have a wonderful day.